All right, so we are recording. I'm just going to make sure I have everything going right. All right, so I'm going to get started. I know there's a chance with being a smaller channel that when I start these, we don't have anybody on them, but I hope that it's something that you can watch later and be useful to you. So I'm always going to have, and my kitty's here, my personal assistant Smudge. I'm always going to have something prepared for you guys. So even if we're not coming with questions, I at least have some content that we can record. And then I do have a couple of questions from over on my Instagram channel. So feel free. I see I have one person that showed up here. If you have any questions as we're going through, just pop them in the chat and I'll address them. If I can't answer them, I will find an answer for you and we will talk about it later. So in this episode or in this live, I wanted to talk to you guys about investing in real estate. I have a lot of DIY content on my channel and on my TikTok and on my Instagram, but most of the time I'm working on a project that is for a renovation for a rental property. And a lot of people reach out, and especially a lot of contractors that know how to do projects, that know how to do repairs, but they are not sure how to get into the investing side. They'd like to expand into the investing side. And I think with real estate investing, the hardest piece, especially when you're starting out, is always the money. For people that have money, they're like, oh, it's easy to find money and find deals. For when you're starting, that's so hard. When you don't have it, it's so hard. And so I'm just going to share a little bit of how me and my husband got into real estate investing and our journey and how that went. So I am about to be 35. Actually, next week I'll be turning 35. And I started, I guess my journey or my stumble into real estate started when I was 16 or 17. So I was in high school. I had a couple of teachers who owned lots of rental property, and they ended up giving me a job working in their investment properties. They just said, you want a job? You're a hard worker. What do you want a job working for us? And so I started doing maintenance and repairs in a trailer park and in their other investment properties. And when I was young, I was 17 when I started working for them, I didn't think that it was anything more than I have a job and I'm getting a good hourly wage. And so that's all it was to me. I didn't see what it was going to turn into or see beyond that. And so I'm so lucky that I had that beginning learning where I got to learn the basics of construction and repairs on properties and how all of that worked early on. So I'm going to move her because I'm afraid she's going to turn this off. Sorry, Smudge. So I started working for them and I worked for them all through high school. And then I went the traditional path. I went to college because I was in that generation. I graduated in 2008 from high school. And my parents always just said, we don't care what you go to college for. We just want you to have a college degree. And I think in that generation, they really pushed college degrees, which is funny because I feel like now a college degree is really valuable if you're studying something that you can use. But I also think there's a lot of not valuable college degrees where we're just going into a lot of debt and spending a lot of money. So I worked for what I would call my real estate mentors through high school, through college. I did 2 years of college in the town I lived in. I did a community college, and then I went and finished at a university. And then I also then went on and got a master's degree, which I do not use at all. And so after that, when me and my husband were getting married, which was when I was in grad school and he was going off, I'm trying to remember a timeline. He was in the Army and he was going off for some military school, I think. I can't even remember. Anyway, that's when we bought our first property. It was when I was in grad school. And I was very fortunate. I was able to buy a property that was seller financed and we rented it right away. I live in a community where rental properties have stayed strong as long as I've paid attention to them. So for the last 20 years, rental properties kind of go up and down with the economy. Like you might not rent them for quite as much. You might rent them for a little bit less, but they always stay steady. We've never had an issue renting our properties in the economy and in the market that we're in. So we bought our first property. I was still living out of town for grad school. My husband was out of town for either one of his military or police trainings. And we didn't even know that we were going to live in the town that we bought that property in, but it was an opportunity. It was an area we knew and were really familiar with. And the funny thing is, when we first started buying property, I knew I wanted to do, I was scared because it's just scary to do something like that when you're in your lower 20s. But I had people telling me, this is stupid. This is such a big risk. You shouldn't do this. You're going to lose everything. Why are you taking on this risk? But I knew it was the right thing to do. I knew in my gut that the investments were right and that it was going to be the right decision for us. But from the beginning, my husband told me, I don't want anything to do with rental property. I'm supportive if this is what you want to do and these are investments you want to make, and if you want to take on these risks, I'm down. I'm on the same page as you, but this is not the life I want. I don't want to be doing construction. I don't want to be doing renovations. I don't find that enjoyable. I don't find that fun. I want nothing to do with it. So from the beginning, we had this agreement that he was going to be on board with me taking the risk of making these investments, especially when you start and it's scarier and riskier, but he did not want to be a part of it. And so we bought our first property. I finished school and I came back to the town I'm in, which is in Wyoming. It's Rock Springs. And he was still kind of bebopping in and out because he was in the military and they'd send him to different trainings and stuff like that. So we came back here. Oh, at that point, he was a state trooper. So we got stationed back in Rock Springs, which is the town we had the property in, but our property was rented. And so we had another property that we were going to rent from a friend. They let us stay there for a little while. And then they said, you can't stay here anymore. They wanted us to get rid of our cat. And we're like, not getting rid of the cat. So we were like, what are we going to do? So we tried to go buy a second property. So we went to the bank. At that point, I was a graduate teaching assistant. So he was in Rock Springs and I was still in Laramie at the University of Wyoming finishing school. And so he was in Rock Springs working as a state trooper. I was finishing grad school. I got paid as a teaching assistant. I got a stipend. I was paid to teach, but that was going to end because I was finishing grad school. So I was going to have to come back to Rock Springs and get a job. And so we go to a bank. We get pre-qualified because we know now we have to find a house to live in. We're not going to live in our rental because we have a renter in there. And so we get pre-qualified. We put an offer on a house. We get the house under contract. And a couple of days later, the lender calls us and says, sorry, you're not actually qualified. We can't give you the loan. And he had said that because I was a teaching assistant, and that was going to end. They couldn't count that income because it was going away and I hadn't replaced it yet. And then secondarily, he said that because we had that rental property, and this is what you'll run into when you start buying properties, even though it had been a rental and it was cash flowing, you have to show cash flow and a return on that rental property for at least 2 years on your tax returns. And we hadn't had it that long. And so they could only count, even though we were making income on that, our mortgage was less than what the rent was, they could only count our mortgage as debt and they couldn't count the income against it. And so at the same time, we had a ton of student loans. My husband had student loans and we were working really hard to pay those off. He was in the military and they were supposed to pay those. And it took 6 years for them to start paying. And we found out, and we kept resubmitting the paperwork. And we found out the guy in charge of the department, he hadn't been trained properly and he didn't know how to deal with that. And so anytime anyone would submit the paperwork to pay their student loans down and do the student loan repayment, he was just shredding it. And it wasn't just him, it was for, I'm sure, anybody in that division or that department. And so we just kept resubmitting it, wondering what was going on. And he was in for 8 years. It took 6 years for those repayments to start. Our minimum student loan payments at that time, it was $1,200 a month, our minimum, which is a mortgage. It's a house payment. Back then, that was double what one of our mortgages was. And so I knew, my husband kept saying, hey, listen, the Army's going to pay them. The Army's going to pay them. And I was calculating and looking at what those interest rates were and telling them, even if they pay, because once they start paying, they don't back pay for all the years they didn't, they start paying moving forward. And I had done the math of what they had promised to pay. And if we waited until they started paying, and if we just started paying and biting, paying more and extra, and it was way better for us just to pay the student loans off ourselves. So we had multiple jobs. My husband was in the National Guard at the time. He was a state trooper. And that was really hard because he guarded out of a different state. And so he worked in Wyoming. He was in the National Guard in Colorado, and he would have to travel, and he would lose money. He got paid so little in the Guard that when he would go to Army, he actually lost money every month to make it there, stay, food, and get back. And so that was actually, even though it was a second full-time job, or not full-time, a part-time job, it was a loss. And then so what I started doing is I worked for the county. I was a juvenile probation agent. I was still working for my little bit, as much as I could on the side, my real estate mentors. I was doing tax prep for a local accountant during tax season, or taxes during just that season where everyone's doing their returns. And then I was also selling on eBay like crazy, because I'm like, we got to pay these student loans down. We got to make all the extra money we can. And I have to be saving for this next property, because obviously we have the one, we want to be able to buy more. And that's the hardest part, when you're in that piece where you have one or you have two and you can't buy the next one because the bank is going to look at your debt to income ratios. Okay, I have Ghost in here. I'm going to say hi, Ghost. I guess I could just say that here. So I have Ghost here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the 3 of you that are here right now. I appreciate you guys taking your time on a Monday night. And so I knew I just had to be hustling so that we could get our debt to income ratios right, because a lender is going to look at all of your cumulative debt and all of your cumulative income, and it has to fall into a certain ratio. And then when you buy that next property, you still have to fall within that ratio, because if that next property puts you above the percentage that you can be within, then you can't buy it. You have to wait till you have more down or you have a higher income. And so that was where we were kind of stuck to get from that one property to that two property. That was the hardest piece. And so we just worked and we saved and we hustled and we grinded. And everything we could, we put towards those student loans to pay them off. And we waited those 2 years to get those returns that showed that our rental property had been a rental for 2 years and was making income. But then what happened was our renter moved out. They let us know they were going to be leaving, and we moved into that property. But the nice thing about that was it had a really low mortgage. And so we were able to save and pay. And when everybody around me had just graduated and was buying a really nice house and getting the kind of house they were probably going to be in for a while, I was thinking, we have to stay below this, because we have to be able to keep this payment and take on the next payment without getting rid of this payment. And so we super underbought, and we stayed in that house that had been a rental, and we just saved and saved and saved. The next one we bought was the one that I think really set us forward. And that was buying a multifamily property. So if you are a little bit in the investing world, you probably know this. But if you've never bought an investment property before, you might not know. You can use a traditional financed loan. So we're talking, if you qualify for a VA loan, an FHA loan, a conventional loan, you can buy up to 4 units. So if you can buy something that has multiple units, the great thing is it helps cover your mortgage while you live there. And then once you move out, that's even more income. And so we had seen a triplex that came on the market. And I always was kind of watching the market, but I had been so burned by that lender who had said, you qualify. Oh, no, you don't. I was terrified. I just thought nobody would ever give us a loan. Nobody would ever loan us money. We would never be able to buy our next property. I lived in such a place of fear. Okay. Ghost from Peru. How cool. Happy to see you from Peru. Thank you for joining. And so I always kind of watched the market, but I just never thought, oh, no one will lend to me. And so we had found a triplex that had been on the market for a little while. It was a house in the front, and it was on a corner. So there's a house on the front, and in the back, there was a separate house that had a whole separate street address because it was on a corner. And that one had an upstairs and downstairs apartment. When we were looking at it, the front house was vacant. And then the back house, there had been an upstairs tenant, and they had moved out. The realtor told us that they had been spooked by excuse me, they had been spooked by the house getting listed and I think worried about what would be happening. And so they moved out. And then there was a downstairs tenant that had been there for many, 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 many years. He basically was, I mean, I think he was paying $450 and we were paying when we bought it, the owner was paying all his utilities. And so when it crossed out, it was like there really wasn't much cash flow there, but he had been there for so long. And so I thought, well, let's buy it. Let's live in the worst unit and rent out the nicest ones and make as much income as we can. And then eventually save, right? And then move on to our next property. And my husband was like, we are not living in a basement. Like we're not making that much of a sacrifice on it, but we can do it. And so we bought it. And because we were going to move into one of the units, we were able to do an FHA loan. And if you owner occupy with an FHA loan, you can put as little as 3.5% down. So normally when you buy an investment property, if you're not going to owner occupy, it's 20 to 25% down, 20% down, 25 if you want a better interest rate. There are some banks that kind of have some non-conforming stuff that will do 15, but it's a little harder to find and your interest rate's going to be higher. But with just a traditional loan, you're going to have to do 20% down for an investment property. So that's the great part about moving into one, living in it for whatever term your loan requires, and then keeping it and moving on and buying your next one is you're avoiding those big down payments. Now today, I don't know if that helps you as much. Back then it did, but now I think your bigger issue is not down payment. Obviously is hard. You have to save the money. But another hard piece is saving up or getting your payment enough to where it's low enough that the rents cover it. So sometimes I'm seeing investors now, they're doing a larger down payment to make it where the cash flow on the unit is where they want to be with interest rates being higher. So it's a little bit different of a game than it was back then. But so on that triplex, we were able to go as low as 3.5% down because we owner occupied. And so we actually ended up doing 10% down because we were told that if you do an FHA loan, FHA loans always have private mortgage insurance. And what private mortgage insurance means is if you don't put 20% down, your lender is going to charge you an extra fee every month. And that insurance protects them. It's not for you. Basically, because you didn't put 20% down, you're riskier. And they're going to charge you an extra fee every month until you get to an 80-20 loan value. With the FHA loan, it stays on for the life of the loan usually. But PMI is the worst. Yeah. But so listen to this here. If you do an FHA loan, you have PMI for the life of your loan. But if you have an FHA loan and you put, if you put 10% or more down, the PMI falls off at year 11. It doesn't matter if you pay extra. It doesn't matter if you get down lower quicker. It's going to fall off at year 11. So I wanted to make sure that it would fall off, but I also wanted to have enough money to update and renovate the property. And so we did the 10% down so that PMI would fall off at year 11. Now, if you're doing a conventional loan, if you have PMI at 75%, it automatically falls off. At 80%, you can call your lender and ask them to remove it. So if you have PMI on your loan and you're conventional, definitely pay attention to where you're at in your ratios or if the values are going up in your area, because I've had clients get a hold of me that they just need a market analysis from a real estate broker. And if that shows that the value is better, they can get that PMI dropped off of there. So pay attention to that on your own, even if it's your primary home. There you go. Yep. Got your house appraised so that you could get it removed. Definitely. A lot of people don't know that. Or, it falls off at that 75%, but that 75 to 80 is a long term. Or, if your house went up and your market value went up, that might come off a lot sooner than you think. So that's something to think about. Now, the other thing I would say now with that FHA thing is most people right now are not planning on keeping their loans for 11 years. I think we're all hoping the interest rates will improve. Will they? I don't know. Like we paid all this extra and stuff to try to just get the balance down. And we ended up refinancing when interest rates were better anyway. So we didn't have it for 11 years, but that's why we made the decision that we made. And so we renovated the front house, we moved into that property, and then we rented out the back 2 units. And the back 2 units, they almost covered our mortgage, not quite, but it made it where our monthly impact, instead of having a big mortgage every month, it was a lot less to pay because we had that impact lessened by our back tenants. Now, what that allowed us to do was to save every dollar that would have gone towards our mortgage and invest it towards our next down payment on our next property when that time came, and we were able to do that. And so again, it wasn't quite, we weren't living for free, but we were just having to pay a little bit. Sorry about my kitty, guys. She likes to be involved. But when we then moved out of that front unit, this is when it was really cool. Then that unit cash flowed really well because we were living in the nicest unit. So that's a decision you have to make is do you want to live in the nicest one or do you want to live in the cheap one and have the more income up front? But we had to kind of find a balance for our family. But now that place, it cash flows really well because that front unit is rented and all that time we lived in it, we were able to save the money towards our next down payment. And so then after that, we were able to purchase another seller finance property. And then we just kept buying them as we could. Cash flow is king and enticing when first starting off. But you know what's crazy, Steven? So I think cash flow is really important. And I think it depends on what your goals are as far as, I mean, obviously we all want to make money and I think a lot of people want to get out of their jobs or maybe find an exit to their 9 to 5. But the other thing you got to think about with investing is the wealth you're building through growing your equity too. So just a scenario of the first property we ever bought, actually, we'll just do that one. The first house that we ever bought, we bought it was right when we were getting married. So we got married in 2013. So I think 12 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, or 11, 12 years ago. And we bought it for 130. And that property, I would say, and we fixed it up. We've not done huge things to it, but between renters and maybe someone really does some damage and stuff like that. But that property now is, I would say, probably worth, I bet I could sell it for 200. And I have not had to put any money into that property. It was a seller finance deal. They didn't make me put any down, which is very rare. I was very blessed and lucky in that situation. So each time a renter has moved out, we've put money into it, but I didn't put a down payment into it. And it's always been rented, except for when we've been fixing it up between tenants. So we bought it for 130. It's probably worth 200 now. I didn't put anything down. My renters have paid the mortgage for me plus some every single month, except for when it was vacant for renovations for the last 12 years. And so I have probably about, the $70,000 in increased value, but I have 3 of those townhouses now. And I bought them all for about the same price. And so the equity that I have sitting in those properties that when I go to sell them, here's the deal too. I bought it for 130, but for instance, that property, I probably owe 60 something on it now because we did it on a 20-year mortgage. And so the equity there, I can either sell it and I have that equity, which then I'd have to pay taxes on it, or I can borrow against that if I want to do a line of credit, which is a little bit harder on investment properties, but it's still possible. And so now that property can be a bank that I can borrow against to invest in other properties. And that 130 to 60 that's paid down, I haven't paid that down. My renters through paying their rent have paid that. And so now that 130, I owe 60 something on it, but it's worth about 200. Again, on 3 of those, I haven't had to put that money in besides the repairs my renters have. So I always, when I started, I would look at what that cash flow is every month. And I'd go, okay, if I'm making, $200 on this one, $400 on this one, how many do I need to have the financial balance that I want to have? But it wasn't until several years in when I started looking at that equity and I went, dang, that's what's getting us. The equity growth is really just waiting and going over time and seeing the value increase in your properties. That's where you're going to grow the wealth. But of course, you have to have the cash flow too. But I have another job. I'm not living off of my rental properties. I would love to be able to one day, but I'm a real estate broker. I sell houses for other people. I do construction. I don't do it for other people anymore. I don't have time, but I used to do tile and bathroom renovations and stuff like that for clients. So that's one thing I really like about rental property too, is a lot of people, they would like to be able to leave their jobs, which I totally understand. But the thing that speaks to my heart is the person that has a job and they want to maybe be able to retire a little bit sooner or grow wealth a little bit more or be a little bit more secure. So are you a teacher and you can buckle down and save? And maybe if you could buy a property every 3 years, how transformative would that be for you over a 15, 20-year period, right? I'm not somebody that has thousands and thousands of apartment units. I'm not borrowing money from people to do investment groups. I'm just slowly, cautiously growing and investing. And that's possible for anybody. It really is. So I have a couple questions from people on Instagram I'll get to, but do you guys, since there's a couple of you in here in the chat, do any of you guys have any questions you want me to address? An ad in the middle of the live? Oh, I've never actually watched a live on here, so I don't know. I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm still kind of figuring these out. That's strange. Okay, so you're getting an ad in the middle of the live. How weird. Okay, so if you missed anything, if you guys have any questions, let me know in the chat. So I'll go to one of the questions I got on Instagram from one of my friends over there. So I had a guy message and he asked, what's my thoughts on investing in condos/apartments? And I think he meant buying individual condominiums, not buying like an apartment complex. Because if you're getting started out, you probably don't have access to capital to buy an apartment complex, right? That's a down the road thing. And so my perspective on condos or anything with an HOA is you really have to do your research and you have to be very careful. So I look at a couple things when I look at investment properties. I look at, do they cash flow now? I look at, do I think they're going to increase in value? And I look at sellability. Now, I am not buying things to sell unless I'm looking at it as a flip. But you never know when something may happen when you have to offload something. And the thing I like about investing in single family properties, and I don't mean single families, like not like you bought one half of a duplex, but I know it would be easier for me to sell one of my townhomes because everyone's looking for a home right now than it would be for me to sell my triplex in my market. That may be different everywhere else. And so I've always thought single family, if I had to exit or I needed cash or I had an emergency and I had to offload one, I could sell, those easily. So when I look at a condo, I look at again, you got to know your market. And I only know my market, but I look at some of the condos in my area that when I first started investing in real estate, I remember my mentor, they owned a couple that I worked on. And then as a realtor, when I first got into real estate, I would see a couple of these condominiums sell in my area. It's a specific area of condos. And, I didn't have the money. I could have not bought one. I did not have the money. So it wasn't even an option for me, but they would sell for like $65,000. And it was kind of hard to sell them. They would sit on the market for a while. And what had happened with that condominium complex is the ratio of ownership of owner occupants to owner investors had shifted to a point where banks would not loan on them for an occupant anymore. They felt like it was too risky if more of the occupants were investors than owner occupants or owners, then they didn't want to invest on them. So they became not financeable. They had to be cash deals. And it wasn't because anything was wrong with them. They didn't meet the codes for as far as safety and electric and all that. It was just because of the ratio of ownership in the condominium complex. And so I always kind of watched people buy those and they made sense. They rented, that they cash flowed, but I always thought, man, if you had one and you had to sell it, it might be harder to sell them. Well, fast forward now, how maybe this was 7-8 years ago. Now we see those same properties that sold for $55,000 to $65,000 selling for $130,000, $135,000 in my area. And probably, I think I saw one for rent the other day for $1,350 a month. And so they are, for cash flow, they have been good investments for people that have purchased them. They have increased in value as well. And I think now they are financeable. I think that little weird blip of time where they wouldn't do that financing, I think they will now because I've seen them sell and I haven't seen that come up as a problem with our investors in the area. And so something that I would have been scared of back then, it was a condo, it's increased in value and they cash flow well. Now, here is the other thing I will say with a condo or anything with an HOA. Now, I live in Wyoming, and Wyoming is kind of like, leave us alone, let people do what they want with their property. But we do have a couple of HOAs. I know some bigger areas, HOAs are like everywhere, right? And so that might not be something you can avoid. But I do have a horror story with an HOA. So I had a client who wanted to get into real estate investing. And they purchased a property in an HOA in Green River, which is a small town that is, like 13 miles away from the town I live in. They bought these really nice townhouses. They're in really great shape. They have an HOA and they get in this property. There's no disclosures about not being able to rent it. There's nothing in the bylaws about not being able to rent it. And they buy the house, they close, they call the water department to put it in a landlord agreement. And the lady at the water department goes, "Oh, those aren't allowed to be rental properties." And what had happened was the HOA was operating illegally, and to my knowledge, they still are. And some HOAs have rules that only a certain percentage of the units can be rented, and the rest have to be owner occupied. And once you get above that threshold, they can no longer be rented. This was not in their bylaws for their HOA. So they were operating that way and they were enforcing it, but there was no rule for it. So I talked to my client and I say, "Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to turn around and sell the house? I'll eat the loss." I said, "I will sell it for free." Obviously, like it wasn't my fault because it wasn't in the bylaws, but I felt terrible. I said, I'll eat the loss. Let's try to sell it. I will obviously not charge a commission and I will eat any loss you have turning around and selling it, but we got to get it on the market now. Or I will pay up to X amount, which was about the amount I thought I was going to lose in the transaction. It was $10,000 in legal fees if you want to fight it. This is your decision. But after it goes above 10,000 in legal fees, I'm not paying any more. So do you want to get rid of it or do you want to fight it? And originally they wanted to fight it. I got them with an attorney that's really good in the state, that's really real estate specific. And we found out that they had a client who was in the same situation and had been fighting it for years. And the HOA just kept assessing penalty after penalty after penalty against them. And because someone in the HOA was an attorney, and so they had like basically unlimited access to a free attorney, and the HOA was very heavily funded, they were never going to have they were going to lose just because they were going to lose in paying legal fees. And so they decided to turn around and sell it. Luckily, the market had shifted enough. I didn't charge a commission. They actually ended up walking away with some money. I obviously did the job for free, and it worked out okay for them. But if the HOA can out legal you, even if they're wrong, unless you're an attorney and you can keep filing your own paperwork, that's my fear with anything with an HOA. So at least here, I might buy something in an HOA in a city where it's more necessary, but I would be very scared just because I got burned so bad in that experience of them operating illegally and unethically. Okay, I got a couple questions on here. Have you heard of a ride for real estate investing? No, I haven't. Do you want to tell me a little bit? Do you want to write a little bit more in here about what it is? I haven't heard of it before. And then how do you deal with houses going over list price? My current situation is good. Houses always go fast and much higher. Are you talking about if you're an investor and you're wanting to buy something and they're going in list price, like the houses on the market are going above the list price for sale? Okay. So yeah, I think sometimes you get beat out of a market. I think sometimes because here's what I'm seeing in my market right now. People want to invest and there haven't been a lot of good investment opportunities available lately in my market. And so we'll see these cash properties flips or the sheriff sells or the auctions. And I think they're selling for a little bit higher than what would make sense for me to buy them for. And so if you buy too high, you're losing from the beginning. You can't lose from the beginning. Now, if you're going to buy and hold it long term as a rental, you have a little bit more, you can play it out over time, right? I mean, there's crashes that can happen in markets, but in general, the market's going to improve over time. But you also have to be able to make sure that you're cash flowing or you're comfortable with not cash flowing. I know some people have different parts of their portfolios that cash flow and some that don't. I have one property that when I bought it, it actually, sorry, I'm reading the chat over here too. When I bought it, it did not cash flow because it was something that someone was willing to sell or finance to me on a 15-year mortgage, which super grateful for. You don't get that very often, but at a 15-year mortgage, it wasn't cash flowing, but I knew between my job, that's where my income comes from, and the rest of my portfolio to get that property at that price and seller finance was definitely worth it. And again, I'm increasing in equity. I was looking at that property as the equity game. So I think it depends on how your finances are allocated. if you can go a little bit higher and know that this property doesn't cash flow yet, but it's not going to hurt me and it's going to cash flow, but you can't buy too high. If it goes above appraisal and you're upside down on a house and you can't turn around and sell it for more and you can't rent it for more, how long can you outlast that? Sometimes people have to invest in other markets. Like in my town, when I used to do property management, we don't anymore, but we would have a lot of investors invest here from out of state because they lived in Oregon or they lived in Washington or they lived in California and they could not afford to buy a cash flowing property where they were at. They had to find areas out of their area to invest, which I don't have experience with investing out of my area, but I know sometimes people have to go out of their market just to find something that makes sense with cash flow, or their market's just kind of exploded and it's hard to find that buy box that you need anymore. Do you have a minimum number of beds, baths you look for when you look for a home to buy? I think it depends on your market, and I think it depends on what you're trying to do with that property. So yes, I do in my town. In my area, I find that 2 bedrooms are really hard to resell. And so I would not buy something with a 2 bedroom. They do okay as rentals. If it was for a rental and it cash flowed well, I would buy a 2 bedroom home. But for a flip, if it was a 2 bedroom and I couldn't make it into a 3 bedroom, unless, again, it's always back to your numbers. There's these kind of rules I have unless the numbers work, right? So in general, I'm looking for a flip, I want to at least be able to make it into a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom. The other thing is for a rental, I want to be able to have 2 bathrooms. I have one multi-bedroom house left that has a 1 bathroom in it. And when that tenant moves out, we're going to add a bathroom in the basement, because the comment we always get when we try to rent it is people would like another bathroom. Now, I have some 1 bedroom units. So my triplex, the back house that has the upstairs and downstairs, are each 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom units. Those rent fine, but I'm not looking at that as a flip because it's a triplex anyway. They also do really well on Airbnb. So in my area, my experience when I was doing short-term rentals was 1 bedroom, 1 bath was a sweet spot, because the margin markup I could get from renting it for long-term to short-term for a 1 bedroom was worth the extra work. When I went to a full-size house, it was so much more laundry and so much more cleaning and so much more fees for all of that, that when I did a full 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom house on Airbnb, I couldn't make enough more to justify the extra time and effort like I could on a 1 bedroom. So I kind of have these little buy boxes, but it depends on, is it going to be a short-term rental? Is it going to be a midterm rental? Is it going to be a flip? And that might be completely different in your area and in your market. So you're going to kind of have to explore where you live, what's best. Okay. No, I think you invest like shares of the real estate property. Is this for arrived? I don't know. I don't know anything about that. Now, I will say I would always tell people to be cautious of investment groups. All these investment funds, I'm sure you've all seen it. And I'm sure there's good ones and I'm sure there's ethical people, but I'm adverse to risk and I don't have a lot of trust for people. There's all these funds where someone's going to show you their Lamborghini and show you how successful they are. And we just want you to invest and then we'll go flip for you and you don't have to do any of the work and you'll get a return, and they want you to invest in them, or they want you to buy something really expensive to buy in. And so I would just always say do your due diligence, because I've heard a lot of these investment groups are going under. The other thing that I've heard is like when people collect capital for commercial real estate, so anything 1 to 4 units residential, you can buy with a traditional mortgage. 5+ is commercial. So you're looking at a commercial loan. Commercial loans are usually not fixed for the life of the loan. So a lot of these people went into commercial real estate when interest rates were really low. They were able to make an investment and it cash flowed and it made sense. But now they're having to call back all their investors and ask for more money and more capital, because now they have to refinance and they're not cash flowing. So be really careful with those investment groups. Just make sure you're reading all the small print, because if that group goes under or goes bankrupt or whatever, you don't have any protection. At least if somebody loans me money for a house and I buy a property, they're the mortgage holder and they have the collateral of that property. So and this has never happened and never would, if I skip out on them, they can take that house back. So they at least have some collateral. If you invest in a collective real estate investment group, you have no protection if it goes under. Okay. How much do you budget for adding a bathroom in Wyoming? Give or take 15K. So I think it depends on what your access is. Also, take this with a grain of salt because I am a contractor. And so I do a lot of the labor myself. I would say 15K is definitely more than I need to add a bathroom. I would say I could probably do one for 10 or less in any situation that we would do it in. So if you're going to have to jackhammer concrete, right now I'm flipping a house that we had to do some jackhammering of foundation and the concrete foundation. That cost a lot more and to tie in. If you have a property where the last one that we did, it had a crawl space underneath and the basement was unfinished, we did all the work, relocated all the plumbing, and then afterwards, then we finished everything. Because it was accessible, that was significantly less. So I would say I can do a bathroom for 5 to 10 myself. I think if you're paying a contractor, I would probably budget in about 15. I think that's pretty good. I invest in the East Coast, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, North Carolina. The prices here are getting very high. Some median prices in North Virginia close to $1 million. Sean, how are you even able to buy anything now that makes sense? Or are you just kind of at a pause right now until something changes? Or are the rents matching up to where it's worth it? And one thing I would say is if you're in an area where the rents are getting harder to keep up with, midterm may be a solution. So I have some properties, and I'm not doing this right now because our rents in my area to the values have gotten so high that I didn't get enough more from a short term or midterm to a long term that it was worth the extra time invested for me. But I have a lot of friends who are investing now, or a lot of clients who are renting to like traveling nurses, not like Airbnb night by night by night, but they're doing 3-month rentals, 6-month rentals, fully furnished, and they're able to charge a markup because they're doing that midterm. And that's where they're kind of finding the sweet spot. Now, I always like my numbers to make sense long term because you never know when your city's going to come in. And we've seen this all over if you're following the news where people invest heavily in an area and Airbnbs, and then the city says, nope, can't do it anymore. So I like my numbers to make sense long term. And then if I have to do something different, I will. But I don't like when people do their numbers off of short-term Airbnb numbers, because if you then can't do that anymore, are you going to lose everything? I'm very conservative though, and there's people that take more risk and do well, and you just kind of have to determine for yourself what you're comfortable with. What do you think of real estate investing apps like Fundrise? I don't know what Fundrise is. What is it? Can you tell me a little bit more? I'm going to look it up. Fundrise is one of the 50 largest real estate private equity investors in the world by total deployment, annual deployment, deploying more than $1 billion in capital. Let's look at how it works. Crowdfunding site. Man, I just have such a distrust of people, and that you got, like I said before, do your research, read all the small print, do all your, read everything that could be of risk, and then just make an educated decision. I just think of all the things that I've seen. Have any of you guys seen the documentary or any of the stuff on WeWork and that guy that did the co-working spaces and raised all this money and just blew it and screwed all of his investors over? People are real comfortable with borrowing money. And I don't mean like a traditional mortgage where if you're going to buy your first property, you're going to get a loan. But I just think that you have to be really careful with who you trust. And so just do your research on if it seems like it's legitimate or not. It's not something I've used. I would just always say do your research and do your due diligence. Okay, the next question I had on my Instagram from one of my friends over there was, I think what he asked was, he has a home renovation business and he would like to get into real estate investing, but he's kind of just making enough money in his real estate or his home renovation business just to get by and pay his bills, but really not anything extra. What would I recommend for how he could get started? And I think the best thing, honestly, is first you have to make sure you're claiming your income. So one of the things I see with a lot of people that own their own businesses, and when I talk to mortgage lenders or I have friends that own businesses, they're finding a way to make their taxes where they obviously don't want to pay more taxes than you need to, but you also have to report some level of income or no one's going to give you a mortgage. So you have to be making so much that you have the cash to buy, or at least reporting enough income where you can get a loan to get a mortgage. And so as a business owner, one, you have to make sure you're reporting your income. And then two, if you qualify for a home and you can buy a home, the first thing I would say is underbuy. You don't have to buy your dream home as your first purchase. We bought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We bought 5 houses before we ended up in the house that was actually the house we wanted to live in, because we would buy one, move into the next one, fix it up, because then we could get owner occupant financing. Or I also wanted my debt to income ratios to be low enough that I was able to get another loan for the next property. And so I had to wait till the other one showed up as income on a return. Okay, wait till the other one shows up. And so my advice to him would be, make sure you're claiming your income and get steady on that. And then for him, as somebody who has the skills as a renovator, a contractor, a remodeler, he has 2 options. He can either buy his primary home and buy something and fix it up and add value to it and then sell it, or, the easiest thing though, because it's hard to then, if you want to have rental, a flip's one thing, but if you want to have a rental, the best thing to do is buy a multifamily home. It just is. If you can buy a duplex or something you can make into a duplex where you have a basement apartment or something like that, so you have the income that's lessening the blow of your mortgage, you're able to save more, and then they can look at some of that income before you go on to buy the next property. Then when you go on to the next one, you had some income from one unit, then you rent your unit out and you have even more income. And so I think the best way to be able to get into a property and then be able to keep it and go on to the next property is buying a multifamily property. Or if you're a contractor and you could partner with someone, now this is where you have to build the trust, because one thing I really hate is I always hear all these people on podcasts and like, here's what I would do if I was getting started. And they have like, $20 million worth of real estate. They're like, I'd find someone with money and I'd borrow the money from them. Why would somebody with money lend to somebody with no experience unless it's someone that really loves you and trusts you? If you have that, then great. But they're like, yeah, I'd find an investor and I'd say, I'll find the deal if you'll finance it. Well, they can find their own deal. But if you're a contractor, you could partner with somebody that has the capital and you could do all the labor and they could be the capital, and you could figure out what that partnership looks like, whether it's going to be a flip, whether it's going to be a rental at the end, whatever your plan is, and what that allocation looks like. But if I was starting out and I was a contractor, I would try to partner with somebody and just do a couple flips to get some cash set aside, because you might not want to be a partner in a rental with somebody forever, but you could get a flip and get rid of it. I will do all the work. You invest the money, sell it, let's move on after that. And then save all of your profits and all your proceeds, so then you can start doing it on your own. I'm shifting to commercial and smaller apartment buildings. People here cannot afford rent anymore. $1,600 to $2,000 for 2 beds, 1 bath. I'm buying a bit further from the major cities now. Yeah, I think, well, and if you're, okay, so when you're talking about your prices being close to $1 million, are you talking about buying, is that like for a single family home in your area, or is that for buying like a multi-unit, a smaller apartments? I do think it's getting harder for people to afford a single family home. I think that we are going to see more and more people where people live with parents or grandparents move back in with their kids, or kids live with their parents longer. I think back to when me and my husband were starting out. And again, this is Wyoming, so I know it's more expensive in other places. But when we were starting out, we paid for our and we were in a college town, so things were expensive. I think we paid $850 a month for a little, it was a 2-bedroom, but it was a 1-bedroom. And then the dining room had it wasn't actually a wall, but they had screwed drywall to these hutches to make it a room. So it was a 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and we paid $850. And now, I mean, or even just my rentals, the first one I ever bought, the townhouse, when we first started renting those out, those cost $1,000 a month. And now those are $1,500 a month. And that's an entry level rental. And even here, there's one of the nicer apartment complexes that is available to people. They have 3-bedroom apartments and it's $1,500 a month, $1,495 for an apartment. That's no garage, and we have winter, and so garage or something covered is nice for parking. And so I don't know how everyone's talking about it, right? The housing affordability crisis is a big problem. I don't know if we start seeing more modulars being allowed, because at least it can be done faster. It's not really that much cheaper once you buy the land, but you can get homes done quicker. maybe more modulars, more manufactured housing. I don't know if the government's going to subsidize apartments or condos or something like that. But from a building perspective, because I've also looked at, okay, maybe I should build something instead of continuing to renovate. But you in my area, after you buy a lot and build, it's going to cost you at least 400 something thousand dollars to build something. So you have to sell for 550 to make sense. So again, that's expensive here. So just to clarify for you, if you're in a bigger city, a $550,000 home is pretty pricey here. And so again, that's not affordable housing here. And so it doesn't make sense. A builder is not going to build for a loss. So I don't know, without subsidies, how we deal with the affordable. People are living longer. We have a lot of people in the United States. People are lots of kids. And so not having enough housing is going to become even a bigger problem for sure. But that's why if you can invest now and you can buy and hold in long term, I think that's going to be one of the most secure investments you can make, is to buy and hold for a long, long time. All right, guys, any more questions while we're here? We're at about at the 50-minute mark. I'm happy to, if you want to go off the rift a little bit, we can stick with investing, or we can also, if there's any other topics, if it's DIY, that's okay too. If it's real estate, that's okay too. We don't have to quite stay on topic. Anything else you guys want to touch on? Okay. Well, let me know if you guys like the investing content. It's something I'm really passionate about, but I know it's not the main topic of my channel. It's my projects are almost always on a rental or a flip, but I know it's a DIY channel. So I would like to incorporate more into this, because I truly think the way you can change your life. I know so many people that they're not buying a ton of properties. They just buy one every couple of years as they can. And the changes it has made to their life and what they're able to do and their financial stability is huge. And so I like to share this content, and I really like to talk about real estate investing, and my family is probably sick of hearing about it all the time. And so if you want to see more of this type of content, let me know. Okay, homeowner here, not an electrician, but it's helpful to see a few of your videos on wiring. Yeah, and there's so many things that are just little things that I find electricians, it's hard to get them to show up for a small job. Like, I went and met with a client, he's getting ready to sell his home soon, and he needs one outlet switched to a GFI. And people are always like, let the pros do it. Well, he has had like 1 million people not show up because they have big rewiring jobs. They have these huge projects. And so they don't want to show up and change one outlet for you. It's not worth their time. So there's so many things that you can do, that just because you can't get someone to show up and you need to get them done. But two, you save yourself $90 or $200 or whatever they're going to charge you as the minimum to show up. So I do have a couple more wiring things I think will be coming. Unfortunately, I just got a new phone this week. I dropped my phone in some water and I lost all my content that I had, like 15 videos that I had filmed that I had not edited yet. And I lost it all. I have a guy that is going to try to recover the content for me, but I didn't have it backed up to the cloud because I had so much on it, it wouldn't back up. So I'm going to try to get caught up. I'm doing a couple electrical things and I'll try to film those. What's the key thing to do? What's the key thing to do to a home to bring value to the home? I think it's going to depend on your area. I'm sure it is. So what I look at here in my area is there's things you can do that are there's things I can't let go. And so there's things that I see some flippers do that they leave that people don't necessarily pay as much attention to, like lipstick on a pig. And I can't do it deep in my soul. And so like I see a lot of flippers, they're going to make it pretty and shiny, right? They're going to do new granite, but then you have old windows, right? Or they're going to do just the stuff to make it shiny and new, but they're leaving big problems. And so I'm always trying to find a balance of, if I have the walls opened up, I really should address this, even though you don't have to. So for instance, one thing that I'm paying a lot of attention to right now is I remember when I first got into real estate, it was when knob and tube was like phasing out. Now I know knob and tube wiring is really old, but it was like you could still buy a house and get insurance with knob and tube, but not everybody would insure it, and it was getting tricky. And now you can't even get a new policy with knob and tube wiring. Well, now I'm starting to feel the same way about ungrounded houses, right? So we have the houses that have the old you don't have a ground, right? And they're fine and they're safe, and you can put a GFI on there and it will trip to the outlet instead of back to the breaker. But I'm thinking as I renovate a house, if I'm here, I probably should just be rewiring it while I have the walls open. But I mean, things like that, like all those things that are maybe not quite a problem, but they're going to be a problem in a couple of years. So we might as well address them. But I think to add value to a house, besides aesthetically making it more pleasing, bedrooms and bathrooms. But there's a point where it gets stupid, right? Like every once in a while, someone wants a 7-bedroom house, but would it be better to have a 5-bedroom house with an extra family room instead of a 7-bedroom house with 1 family room? Probably. And so you really got to look at your area. I'm always trying to at least get to a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom when I renovate a property. If I can put a primary bathroom, which I can't always, I'm doing one right now where the layout doesn't work. But if you can have a private primary bathroom, a private suite, and then have the separate bathroom for guests and kids and all that, I think people like to have a private bathroom. I think there's things that people like to have that are, I don't know, there's things you can add that are nice, but no one's going to notice either. And so sometimes you got to look at the products you're doing and can I do an affordable product in a cool way instead of picking that really expensive tile or whatever. And I think it depends on your market. If you're a high-end market, a mid-market, because I tend to overdo and I have to rein it back in because I do things that I'm not going to get a return on. I did an entire home rewire with a new meter and shut off outside for the first responders. That was a bit much. Yeah, for sure. I feel like I'll run my wires, I'll do my outlets, I'll do my lights, but I like to have an electrician put it in the box for me and do the new service and all of that. And right now I have an electrician I'm working with that I'm happy with. I think when I don't have somebody that will do something in a timely manner, that's when it's like, oh, now I got to lean a little bit more into this sub. But when I have somebody that will come in and do it fast, then I lean into the other parts of the job that I don't have somebody as reliable that I can sub it out to. Oh yeah, ADUs. That's a big one. Yep. Okay, so very expensive. A few cities here are now allowing ADUs and making affording housing units. The math profit isn't that good though. I think ADUs are a long-term play. I think it's one of those things where when you look at real estate and increasing value in a property, you have to have comps. And so for instance, when I said in my area, my triplex is not going to appreciate the way that a single family property would, I have always looked at that as a long-term buy and hold because we don't have a lot of multifamily sales on our market. People tend to hold on to those. Maybe their seller financing them. I don't know. They're not appraising that high for the value. I have a triplex that if I could split it, it would probably be worth 1.5 times to 2 times as much as it is now. And our appraisals are starting to catch up where we have multifamily. But sometimes if an appraiser, when you get an appraisal on your property, they're going to look at sold properties and they're going to look at properties on the market, but the sold properties have the most value. So if you have an awesome property with an awesome ADU and there's nothing to comp it to, so there's not another one, they can't establish that value. It's just like when people started doing those barn dominiums, financing was kind of hard. People were building them to building code standards, so it wasn't that. But when you don't have a comp for a property, an appraiser can't say this is where I'm getting the value from. So I always call them sacrificial lambs. Like when I was thinking like, could we start building in my area? I thought about townhouses, but I see what a townhouse would need to sell for, even if you did a higher end nice townhome and where they're at. And I'm like, you stair step them. So you have the one that goes a little bit higher, but definitely not what it's worth. And then the next one goes a little bit above that and a little bit above that. And so that's what the ADUs, they might be cash flowing because you can rent it. And I think if you do it and you can hold on to it, I think you'll be okay long-term. But to do the ADU and then to turn around and try to sell it, it's going to be hard to appraise a property with an ADU if you don't have those comps in your area. Or at all. Yeah. I mean, that's a new thing. And I think what's happening is cities that are really struggling with housing are going to set the tone, because the other thing is we don't have language for that in my city, in our like our city planner's statute or whatever it is. And so as California does it, because I've heard that they're starting to do ADUs and condoize them. And so even like where they'll build an ADU and then you can split it and sell it separately, that's where we're going to start to see things kind of progress and move forward. But when you have it as one property with an ADU, that's a little bit tougher to appraise it out. I just purchased a commercial triplex and a commercial duplex. I'm getting them ready for making storefronts. Any tips for finding partners to lease the stores? I think that a good thing is going to be relationships. And I know a lot of people don't want to bring a realtor into it because you don't want to necessarily pay for that for the leasing. But if you're looking for a good long-term lease with like an established like franchises and stuff like that, if you find the biggest commercial broker in your area that has those relationships, that's probably going to be your sweet spot. I remember we have a building here for sale in my town, and it's the city owns it. And they actually partnered with a realtor out of state to try to get commercial leasing into this place, because everyone was pissed because they didn't use a local realtor. And I think they felt like they had bigger fish available from the bigger state over. So I think that, that might be a good place to build relationships. You could obviously put it on, like for lease, you can put it on commercial real estate websites like Crexy, and even maybe putting some stuff on Bigger Pockets for people that are looking. But I think partnering with a realtor that does a lot of commercial and has those relationships might be your sweet spot. Not partner as far as like they're my partner in business, but I just mean like, hey, if you lease it, I'll pay you a commission. Oh yeah, so you had the one you did was the two-prong too. If you rewired and you got rid of some of that cloth and paper wire that you were going from a two-wire to a third wire. I think I have my triplex one, the front house still has the two-prong wiring, so it's something we're going to have to address at one point. All right, guys. Anything else while we're here? Okay. Well, I super appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. I never know when I do a live if I'm just going to be talking to myself, and maybe some people watch it later. So it's really nice when I have people here and we have questions, and it can kind of give us things to address besides just a few things that I had prepared. So I super appreciate you guys being here and supporting the channel. And I just can't tell you guys how much I appreciate you and taking the time to be here with me on a Monday night. So I will see you guys on the next one. If there's anything you want to see, let me know. You can always message me on Instagram. You can comment on the community section on YouTube, which I know is pretty small, but feel free to reach out with things that you want me to address, whether it's real estate or DIY specific, and I'll make my effort to get to it. So thank you guys so much for your time. I hope you guys have a beautiful Monday night. Oh, I subbed Jill will be around, and no sir will go. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate the sub. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night. See ya.